Hey folks, how's it going? My name is Brian Sanyshyn, composer, music educator, and founder of the Game Audio Company. If you're watching this video on YouTube right now, here's a little bit you need to know before we get started. This video is part of a series called the Game Audio Company Academy Launchpad, which is part of our audio learning series inside of our Skool community on Skool.com. Okay, so if you're somebody who's just getting started on your journey in composition or sound design or anything game audio, we highly encourage you to come and join us over on Skool, where you'll have access to more in-depth conversations, in-depth videos and resources and peer reviews and webinars and that sort of thing. So if that's something that piques your interest, it's free to join. Please come on over and join us, and we'll see you there. All right, let's get to it. All right, folks, let's go ahead and get ourselves into the next sort of big part of getting yourself going composing, and that is going to be your DAW, or your digital audio workstation. This is going to be your main axe, the place that you live and you do the most work. Okay, this is the place where you're going to record, where you're going to edit, where you're going to mix, all of that stuff. Okay, so I will tell you, if you do some research online, you're going to find that there are a lot of opinions about, what you should use, why you should use it. This one's the right one. That one's the right one. You definitely shouldn't use this. You definitely shouldn't use that. Okay. And again, I'm here to dispel a lot of that noise. Okay. So I think that, I'm just going to say this. One of the things that you're going to find about me is that I am somebody who very, very firmly believes in what works for you doesn't have to be the thing that works for the person next to you. One of my closest friends is one of those people who very strongly believes, using Logic, I'll just tell you right now, is by far superior to any other DAW out there. And I have found for me that Logic doesn't always get the job done in the way that I need, right? And so we're going to talk a little bit more about this now. Okay, so I'm going to show you sort of my preference. I'll talk about some others. I'll introduce you to a few. Okay. And then you'll just have to go and do a little bit of homework yourself and investigate. I will say for many of these, there are some free trials, or there are less expensive versions of them that you can, kind of get a feel for the software as you go. But I am going to give you an idea of exactly what I am using, right? So my primary axe in terms of my DAW is Cubase Pro. Okay, so Cubase is created by Steinberg. Okay, and I did not start working in Cubase. My very first DAW was actually the PreSonus one, and Studio One, it's called. And when I first started, I wasn't really doing a lot of work with MIDI. I was, just starting to dip my toe into some audio recording, and I had an audio interface like that. Actually, it was this Scarlett that I told you about a minute ago, right? And I just kind of got my hands in it. Okay, and then that was before I owned a Mac, and then so I bought my Mac, and one of my dear friends said, Brian, you really should get Logic. Okay, and so I'll show you Logic here in a minute. I have Logic installed on my computer. That's sort of like my second axe. And so for the first, good maybe 3 or 4 years of my composing career, I was working primarily in Logic, and I got very, very fluent. I was working very fast. But I always felt that there was a part of my workflow that felt a little bit clunky, right? Specifically around the way that Logic handled MIDI. It just, the way that my brain works and that I like to work, there was something about it that felt a little bit disjointed. And then when I got into my composition grad program, Cubase was used by a good number of the folks in that program. Shout out to ThinkSpace Education, by the way. That's where I did my master's. And it was a little pricey, and so I was like, I like Logic, it does the job. If I ever get an opportunity to buy Cubase, I will. And so somehow I think Space got some discounted tickets or something. I don't remember exactly what it was. It was a few years ago. But I was able to get my hands on, at the time, I think it was Cubase 11. Okay, and so I spent about the next 3 months teaching myself how to use Cubase. And I will say, learning how to use a new DAW after you have been using one for a while is very intimidating. Okay, it's just they all do the same thing. At the end of the day, they all produce the same product, and I want to stress that point, right? They will all get the job done, right? But the workflow in them is very different. Where you find things is different. Key commands are different, right? And I am somebody who loves key commands, right? If there's a way for me to do something with my fingers on my keyboard instead of on a mouse, like I'm all for it. It speeds your workflow up just so much. So I spent about 3 months learning how to use Cubase, and I got really fluent in it. And I found that Cubase just really fit my workflow better. In terms of the way that it handles MIDI, the way that you're able to edit and input MIDI, and then even some of the other things like just general audio routing. I think for the way my brain works and how I like to see things and sort of my big setup here, it just worked better for me. It was a cleaner way to work, even though I could do all of the same things essentially in Logic. I just found that visually it was a more inspiring workspace. There's lots of colors, and as silly as that might sound, when you're sitting in your studio for hours on end, you know what I mean, you want to find that inspiration kind of wherever you can. And so for me, I really found that I like Cubase. Cubase, I think, retails the Cubase Pro. They're on 15, I think, now. I haven't updated it in the last 2 just because the updates that were coming out were not super pertinent to my general workflow and what I was doing. And so, rather than just throwing money at it just because, I try to wait until there's something that I need. And I actually think I am going to jump on this newest one because they have this new stem splitter feature, which they also have in Logic, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So I think it retails for about $600. There are many different tiers. Okay. And you may not need, Cubase Pro. It depends on kind of where you start. Obviously there are 5 different ones or 4 different ones, and each one down that you go, I don't know why I'm guessing instead of, just going on Steinberg's website and looking, right? But if we go, let's see, Steinberg Cubase, let's see. Yeah, they're on Cubase 15, accept, and yeah, so the Cubase 15 Pro retails at $579, right? And then it goes down, and there are some things that you lose with each one of those, but if you're somebody who's just getting started and you need to get your hands in a DAW and do a little bit of MIDI recording, and you don't need a million channels and you don't need all these crazy plugins and stuff, then, Cubase Elements would be a great place to start. Okay. Again, I don't want you going and throwing money at things just because, right? You can spend $100 on your DAW instead of $600, right? And that means that you have $500 to spend on things like headphones and speakers and maybe a couple of VSTs or that kind of thing, right? So, give yourself a budget and try to be realistic. The wonderful thing about Cubase is that they have a very, very generous upgrade pricing, right? So, like right now I am in Cubase 13, right? So I think for me to upgrade to Cubase Pro 15, I think it would cost $200 instead of costing almost $600. Okay, so and the same would be true for each of those. So like if you owned Elements and you want to later upgrade to Pro, then you pay a reduced price kind of thing. Okay, so I'm a big fan of Cubase. I really enjoy working in it. I am always learning new ways to do things in it too. There is a tremendous support community for Cubase Online. And Dom Siegless has a great channel that, he's always talking about stuff, and sometimes he's talking about MIDI, and sometimes he's talking about mixing and workflow and all these things. It's a really, really great, it's a really great place. So that's my sort of personal plug for Cubase. Okay. Because like I said, this is what I use. Okay. We're going to come back to Cubase here in a minute. Okay. But I also would like to show you Logic. Okay. Which I'm just going to do a search for it here. Let's see. I have no idea what it's going to open. So Logic is actually we'll create a new project. I'm going to have to put those 2 videos together, these 2 videos, because when I opened up Logic, it screwed up all my audio rounding. So the funny joke is that, all of us sound audio people tend to have the most difficulty when it comes to streaming and creating videos because our audio rigs are a little bit complicated. But when I opened up Logic, it seemed to have rerouted my audio into OBS. So I'm just going to have to put these 2 videos together, and I'm going to say everything that I just said about Logic over um, over what I'm saying right now. So Logic is a great piece of software. Okay, so it costs $200. It's a Mac specific software. So if you choose to be on a PC, which is totally fine, just know that you will not be able to use Logic on your PC. Okay, so unlike Cubase, Logic you pay for only once, and there is no update fee. Anytime they drop a new version of it, you just get the update, so long as your operating system on your computer supports it. Okay, so right now we're up to Logic 11.7, I think, or something like that. And it is, like I said, it is also a great piece of software. It is the software that I use at school in my day job. I teach a high school music production class, and this is what we do in that class is we use Logic. We have a full suite of Macs, and all of my kids are using Focusrite audio interfaces, right? And really simple, inexpensive MIDI controllers and Audio Kinetic headphones, right? So exactly the sort of setup that I'm telling you need to get started. Okay, so we have Logic, we have Cubase. I think that those are probably the two maybe biggest ones when it comes to composition. That's not necessarily, that is by no means the whole list, right? That's just sort of the two that I have had the most experience with, and the people that I know also tend to use that same those same two softwares, right? Among the list, right, there are Pro Tools, Studio One, Reaper. I mean, I could sit here all day and rattle them off, but at the end of the day, you just need to find the one that works for you. Okay. I will say some of you probably have access to, if you have a Mac, you definitely have access to GarageBand, right? Which if you're really just learning and you're just starting to kind of put your fingers to the keyboard and sort of start to define your creative voice a little bit, GarageBand is also a perfectly fine place to start, right? It has full MIDI functionality, right? It is really just Logic Lite, right? It is the free version of Logic. It has some stripped down features, and that's fine. But if you're just learning and you're not somebody who is ready to really put a professional face on it, and you're just trying to kind of get your chops going, right? Something like GarageBand is absolutely fine, right? I also teach a class where my kids are just getting going, and that is where we start, right? So I'm not saying that blindly without knowing what it's able to do. I say that, I think with a good level of authority that GarageBand is a perfectly sufficient place to start if you are just starting out. Okay, so yeah, like I said, I think I have a lot of friends who use a software called Reaper, okay, which I actually think when I was in college, when I took my music tech class in college, Reaper was the one that we learned in. I don't remember exactly. It was a very long time ago. It was almost 15 years ago. But it is a very, very affordable piece of software. There is a very large support community around it, and I know a lot of sound designers, including a sound designer that works for the game audio company, loves Reaper, and actually his name is Christopher Bolte. He wrote a book on how to use Reaper. So it is not only something that is valuable and used, but it's something that's also used by members of our team here at TGAC. So, just spend a little time, do your homework. Don't feel like you need to listen to any of the noise online, right? At the end of the day, you're the one who's going to sit and, be working in that sandbox all day. So, if you have an opportunity to try them out, a lot of them have free trials, right? Try them out, watch videos, learn, write in them, work in them, right? And kind of see, what fits your workflow. Okay. And, if you're anything like me, you may not stay in one forever. You know what I mean? Or you may go back and forth, right? There are some times too, I will say that I find that Logic is more practical for a project that I'm working on, right? If I'm doing something that's a little more audio, live recorded audio heavy instead of using MIDI, I actually tend to lean more towards Logic because I feel like it is a better fit in that way. Okay, so dive in, check them out, see what works for you, okay? And get going on your DAW. All right, the next video, we're going to talk a little bit about some VSTs, virtual instruments, some plugins, that sort of thing, and kind of where your head should be for those things. All right, we'll see you in the next video.